briefing room at Bagram Airfield fell silent when Captain Nadia Volkov walked through the door. 282 soldiers turned to watch, some with curiosity, most with skepticism. She carried her helmet under one arm, her flight suit crisp despite the dust that coated everything in Afghanistan. At 5'4", she looked almost childlike beside the towering infantry officers, but her stride never hesitated. The room smelled of sweat and gun oil, and the metallic tang of anticipation. Someone in the back row muttered something about diversity quotas. She heard it. She always heard it. Colonel Marcus Trent stood at the front, pointing to a map of the Hindu Kush. Red circles marked insurgent positions. Blue arrows showed coalition movements. Everything looked clean and tactical on paper. Reality would be different. It always was. Trent's voice carried across the room, explaining the operation with military precision. Close air support for a ground push into a valley system where intelligence suggested a high-value target. Standard procedure. Routine mission. Except nothing about combat was ever routine. Nadia took her seat in the third row. The chair beside her remained empty, always empty. She'd stopped trying to make small talk months ago. Her call sign was Widow, and the story behind it had followed her from Nelly's to Kandahar to here. Some said she'd gotten her wingman killed. Others claimed she froze during her first combat sortie. The truth was simpler and somehow worse. Her husband, also a pilot, had died in a training accident 3 weeks before her deployment. She'd insisted on going anyway. The Air Force had tried to give her time. She'd refused. Grief made people uncomfortable. Grief in a combat zone made people dangerous, or so the whispers suggested. The major to her left shifted away slightly. She noticed. She always noticed. Trent continued talking about ingress routes and weapons packages. Her A-10 Thunderbolt II, call sign Widow 11, would provide close air support with a full load of 30mm rounds and Maverick missiles. The Warthog wasn't elegant. It wasn't fast. But it was built around a gun that could shred armor like paper, and it could take punishment that would drop any other aircraft. Nadia had 400 hours in type. She knew every rivet, every system, every sound the engines made when they were stressed. A captain from the 10th Mountain Division raised his hand. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't we have more than one CAS bird for an operation this size?" His eyes flicked toward Nadia. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Trent's jaw tightened. "Captain Volkov has flown 63 combat missions. She'll be adequate, adequate." The word stung more than the doubt. She'd learned to swallow both. The briefing continued with talk of radio frequencies and abort criteria and rules of engagement that seemed designed by people who'd never heard bullets snap past their heads. Nadia took notes in neat, precise handwriting. She'd learned early that documentation mattered. Someone was always looking for a reason. The room emptied gradually, soldiers filing out to prepare gear and write letters they hoped wouldn't be final. Trent caught her eye as she stood. "Don't make me regret this." She nodded once. Words felt useless. She'd prove it in the air or she wouldn't. Talk was just noise. Outside, the Afghan sun hammered down with physical force. Heat shimmered off the runway where her A-10 waited, gray and brutal and beautiful. Tech Sergeant Liu was doing a final walk around, checking panels and testing control surfaces. He was one of the few who treated her like just another pilot. She appreciated that more than he'd ever know. "She's ready, Captain. Fresh ammo load, fuel topped off, all systems green." His voice was steady, professional. No judgment, no pity. Perfect. She climbed the ladder to the cockpit, muscle memory guiding her through the pre-flight checks, switches and dials and displays that had become extensions of her own nervous system. The seat wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. She strapped in, feeling the weight of the survival vest and the reassuring bulk of her sidearm. Outside, ground crew pulled chocks and gave hand signals. The twin turbofan engines spooled up with a rising whine that she felt in her chest. Tower cleared her for takeoff. She advanced the throttles, felt the Warthog surge forward, heavy and purposeful. Nose lifted, wheels left earth. The ground fell away and suddenly she could breathe again. Up here nobody cared about her height or her gender or her grief. Up here physics didn't negotiate. Skill mattered, precision mattered. She banked northeast toward the mountains, watching the landscape transform from dusty brown to jagged gray peaks that clawed at the sky. Her radar warning receiver stayed quiet. The radio crackled with traffic from other flights, other missions, other wars being fought in parallel. Widow 1-1, this is Anvil 2-6. We're moving into the valley now. Request you hold at checkpoint Alpha until we make contact. The ground commander's voice was tense. Nadia clicked her mic twice in acknowledgement. She established a racetrack pattern at 15,000 feet, high enough to avoid small arms, low enough to respond quickly. The A-10's wings rocked slightly in mountain thermals. Below, she could see the convoy threading through narrow defiles, vulnerable and exposed. Infantry troops on foot spread out in tactical formation, small as ants from her altitude. Contact, contact, we're taking fire from multiple positions. The radio exploded with overlapping voices. Nadia's heart rate stayed steady at 62 beats per minute. She'd trained for this. More than trained, she'd lived this. Anvil 2-6, Widow 1-1, send coordinates. Her voice cut through the chaos, clear and cold. Numbers came back rapid fire. She punched them into her targeting system, banked hard, nosed down into a dive that pressed her into the seat. The altimeter unwound. 10,000 feet, 8,000. She could see muzzle flashes now, tiny sparks against the gray rock. Her targeting reticle settled over a compound where fire was concentrated. Anvil 2-6, confirm hostile structure at grid November Victor 7348. A pause. Bullets were still flying. Confirmed, cleared hot. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted with a sound like ripping cloth amplified 1,000 times. 70 rounds per second of 30mm depleted uranium tore into the compound. Dust and debris fountained upward. She pulled out of the dive, circled, assessed. The firing had stopped. Good effects, good effects. You just saved our asses, Widow. Relief flooded the radio. She allowed herself a small smile. Anvil 2-6, I'm still holding 4 Mavericks and plenty of 30 Mike. Call when you need me. She climbed back to altitude, resumed her pattern. The adrenaline that had spiked during the gun run began to settle. This was the rhythm of close air support. Boredom punctuated by terror, punctuated by boredom. She'd done this dance before. 30 minutes passed. The convoy advanced deeper into the valley. Then the radio crackled again, different voice, higher pitch, panic. All units, Anvil 2-3 is ambushed. We're pinned down, multiple KIA, we need air now. Nadia's hands moved before conscious thought, already rolling into position. Anvil 2-3, Widow 1-1 inbound. Give me a mark. Smoke grenades popped in the valley below, purple plumes marking friendly positions. She could see the ambush clearly now. A perfect L-shaped trap. Insurgents had let most of the convoy pass, then hammered the rear element. Her weapons system locked onto enemy positions dug into the hillside. She fired a Maverick missile. It streaked downward on a pillar of white smoke, impacted with a flash that she felt more than saw. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition cooking off. She came around for another pass, lower this time, so low she could see individual fighters scrambling. The cannon spoke again. Dust and fire and bodies tumbling like broken dolls. War was never clean. Anyone who said otherwise was lying or selling something. Widow 1-1, you are danger close, pull up. Someone was screaming on the radio. She'd already calculated the geometry. Her rounds would hit exactly where she aimed them. She trusted her training more than their fear. The shells walked up the hillside, each burst precisely placed. When she pulled up, the ambush had collapsed. Survivors were running. The trapped convoy was moving again. Widow, this is Anvil 6 Actual. I don't know what they pay you, but it's not enough. How copy? The battalion commander's voice shook slightly. Solid copy, Anvil 6, just doing the job. She kept her tone flat, professional. Inside, something loosened in her chest. Respect, hard-earned. She checked her fuel, still enough for another hour on station. The convoy continued its advance. She continued her pattern. Guardian angel with titanium skin and a cannon that could destroy anything that moved. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, ancient and indifferent to the small dramas of men and metal. The sky above was painfully blue. Perfect flying weather, perfect killing weather. But the operation was far from over. Intelligence had been good about the target's general location but vague about specifics. That was the problem with intelligence. It was never quite intelligent enough. The ground forces would have to search compound by compound, cave by cave. That meant more exposure, more risk. Nadia's radio stayed active with constant updates. Movement spotted here, suspicious activity there. The fog of war was thick today. Widow 1-1, Anvil 2-6, we've got something weird here. The ground commander's voice had changed, uncertain. That uncertainty made Nadia's instincts prickle. Go ahead 2-6. She kept her aircraft steady, eyes scanning the valley. There's a compound about 2 clicks north of our position. No military-age males visible, just women and kids, but we're getting weird readings on the electronic surveillance. Like there's equipment down there that shouldn't be. Nadia studied her displays. The compound in question sat in a natural bowl protected on 3 sides by ridges, tactically defensible. A single dirt road led in, too perfect, too exposed for a family to live comfortably. 2-6, recommend you hold position. Let me do a low pass for visual confirmation. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. The A-10's nose dropped. She descended to 2,000 feet, then lower. The compound rushed up to meet her. Her eyes caught details. Solar panels on the roof, new construction, satellite dish, and there, barely visible in the shadows of a doorway, the unmistakable shape of a DSHK heavy machine gun. 2-6, you've got a prepared fighting position, weapons visible, this is not a civilian compound. Her voice was ice. Copy that, Widow, we're moving. The transmission cut off in a roar of explosions. The entire valley seemed to erupt. Mortars rained down on the convoy. Machine gun fire poured from positions that hadn't existed moments before. The ambush wasn't L-shaped this time. It was a perfect circle. The insurgents had used the first contact as bait, drawing the battalion deeper into a kill zone that had been weeks in preparation. All units, we are compromised. Multiple casualties. Request immediate CAS. Voices overlapped, some screaming, some eerily calm. Nadia's mind went cold and clear. This was beyond her mission parameters. This was beyond any single aircraft's capacity to handle. She needed help. Viper 3-1, Widow 1-1. I've got troops in contact, heavy engagement. Need you on station now. The F-16 flight that had been holding to the east responded immediately. Widow, Viper 3-1. We're Winchester on air to ground, returning to base. They were out of weapons. She was alone. 282 soldiers on the ground were being torn apart, and she was the only thing between them and annihilation. Her fuel gauge showed 20 minutes before she'd have to break station for refueling. 20 minutes to turn the tide. She selected her remaining Mavericks, began working the problem like an equation. Prioritize threats. Heavy weapons first. Machine gun nests. Mortar positions. She fired missile after missile, each one finding its target with surgical precision. But there were too many targets, not enough missiles. The cannon was all she had left. She dove again and again, each pass lower than the last. Tracers reached up toward her like luminous fingers. She heard impacts against her airframe. The A-10 was designed to absorb punishment, but nothing was invulnerable. A warning light flickered on her panel, hydraulic pressure dropping in the secondary system. She ignored it. Below, soldiers were dying. That mattered more than hydraulics. Widow 1-1, this is Hammer 2-2. We're airborne from Bagram with a full weapons load. ETA 12 minutes. A new voice, female, familiar. Captain Alina Ruiz, another A-10 driver. Relief washed through Nadia, 12 minutes. She could keep them alive for 12 minutes. Copy, Hammer, I'll mark targets for you. She continued her pattern, cannon fire now mixed with marking rockets to designate priority positions. The valley had become a vision of hell. Smoke obscured entire sections. Helicopters were inbound for casualty evacuation, but couldn't land under this fire. Her fuel gauge kissed the red line, 10 minutes to bingo fuel. She had to leave soon or she wouldn't make it back, but the ground forces were still pinned, still dying. The decision crystallized instantly. She wasn't leaving. If she ran out of fuel, she'd glide this beast into the nearest flat space and take her chances. She'd sworn an oath. Nobody said it only counted when convenient. Widow Hammertutu is on station. We've got it from here. Get yourself home. Alina's voice was firm. Nadia checked her mirrors. The second A-10 was there, banking into position. Beautiful and terrible. She'd done everything she could. Time to trust someone else to finish the job. Copy, Hammer. Target coordinates are in your data link. Don't let them down. She pulled up, turned southwest toward base. The battle continued behind her, but other hands controlled it now. The flight back was mechanical. She monitored her damaged hydraulic system, adjusted her approach to compensate. The landing was textbook despite the battle damage. Ground crews swarmed her aircraft the moment she shut down, assessing the hits she'd taken. 17 holes in the fuselage and wings. 3 hydraulic lines damaged. 1 stabilizer partially compromised. Another few hits and she might not have made it back. Colonel Trent was waiting in the debriefing room. His face was unreadable. She expected criticism for extending beyond her fuel parameters, for taking unnecessary risks. Instead, he stood when she entered. Everyone in the room stood. 282 soldiers had gone into that valley. 274 had come out. 8 dead. Terrible numbers, but it could have been all of them. It would have been all of them. Captain Volkov, Trent's voice was formal. Your actions today were beyond exemplary. You single-handedly held off an enemy force of battalion strength until reinforcements arrived. You saved lives, a lot of lives. He paused. I owe you an apology. I called you adequate. That was an insult to what you actually are. She didn't know what to say. Words felt insufficient. She'd done the job, that was all. A private first class approached her afterward, young enough to still have the softness of civilian life in his face. Ma'am, I was with Anvil 2-3, that ambush that hit us. My squad leader, Sergeant Torres, he was right next to me when the mortars started. I froze, completely locked up. I thought I was dead. His voice cracked. And then you came out of nowhere, the sound of your gun. I'll hear it in my dreams, ma'am. Good dreams. You brought us out. She put a hand on his shoulder. You didn't freeze where it mattered. You're still here. That's what counts. He nodded, eyes wet, and walked away. These moments were why she'd refused the bereavement leave. Her husband would have understood. He'd always understood. The grief was still there, a constant ache beneath everything else. But up in the air, focused on the mission, she could breathe. She could function. She could matter. Next morning's briefing was different. The empty chair beside her was occupied, then the one behind. Gradually, the isolation that had defined her deployment began to crack. Someone offered her coffee. Another asked about her A-10's battle damage. Small gestures, they meant everything. Trent outlined another mission. More troops going into contested territory. He looked at Nadia. Widow, you'll be primary CAS again. Any concerns? She shook her head. No concerns, sir. Ready when needed. But before they could launch, a sergeant major entered the room, face grim. Sir, we've got a situation. Captain Volkov, you need to come with me. Her stomach dropped. Had someone filed a complaint, questioned her decisions? She followed him outside where MPs waited. Military police. This was bad. Captain, there's been an incident. Sergeant First Class Damon Carver has been detained. He's requesting to speak with you. Carver, she knew the name. Infantry NCO, solid reputation, 20 years in service. What could he possibly want with her? They led her to a holding area where Carver sat with his hands zip-tied, his face already swelling with bruises. An MP captain explained. Ma'am, approximately 30 minutes ago, Sergeant Carver physically assaulted Captain Volkov. Wait, that's you. I mean, he attempted to assault you. The MP looked confused. Carver spoke through split lips. I did, and she broke my fucking arm. He didn't sound angry, he sounded something else, ashamed. I need to explain, I need her to hear it. The MPs looked at Nadia, she nodded. They gave them space but stayed within earshot. Carver's voice was rough. Yesterday in the valley I was with Anvil 2-3, the ambush. I was the one screaming on the radio. I thought we were all dead. He swallowed hard. When you came in, when I heard that gun, I lost it, ma'am. I was crying, grown-ass man with 20 years in, and I was crying like a kid because I was so scared, and then I wasn't dead. His hands shook despite the restraints. Last night I got drunk, too drunk, and I heard some guys talking shit about you in the mess, saying you got lucky, saying any pilot could have done what you did, and something in me just snapped. Nadia was starting to understand. You came to defend me, he laughed bitterly. That's what I told myself, but really, ma'am, I came to say thank you, and I was still drunk and stupid, and you were walking past the barracks and I tried to. I don't even know what I tried to do. Hug you, shake your hand. I moved too fast, too aggressive. His voice dropped. And you reacted like someone trained to react. I'm not mad about the arm. I deserved it. She remembered now, walking back from evening chow, a large shape lurching from the shadows, muscle memory taking over, wrist lock, lever against the joint, the snap. Him on the ground before conscious thought caught up with her body. She'd been operating on combat reflex. Sergeant, you were intoxicated. You approached without identification. I responded appropriately to a perceived threat. The MPs were watching closely. This could go several directions. Assault charges against Carver, excessive force questions for Nadia. Instead, she turned to the MP captain. Sir, I don't wish to press charges. Sergeant Carver made an error in judgment compounded by alcohol. He meant no harm. I'd request he be remanded to his chain of command for administrative action. The MP frowned. Ma'am, he has a broken radius. Medical confirms it. That's a serious injury. And I'm not disputing that I caused it, but the circumstances were ambiguous. I'm willing to document this as an accident resulting from miscommunication in a high-stress environment. She held the MP's gaze. He nodded slowly. Your call, Captain Carver, you're lucky, but you're also done drinking on this deployment. Copy, Carver nodded emphatically. Yes, sir, crystal clear. They cut his restraints. He stood carefully, cradling his arm. Ma'am, I really am sorry. And I really am grateful. You're the reason I'm still breathing. Word spread fast on a military base. By lunch, everyone knew some version of the story. The details morphed with each telling. Some versions had her taking down 3 drunk soldiers. Others had her performing the arm break with surgical precision while reciting Air Force regulations. The truth was mundane by comparison, but the effect was the same. The female pilot, who'd been dismissed as a diversity checkbox, had broken a sergeant's arm with such efficiency that medics had initially thought it was a training demonstration. The afternoon mission briefing included a new element. A major from intelligence stood at the front, displaying surveillance imagery. The compound Captain Volkov identified yesterday was confirmed as a high-value target location. Ground forces conducted a raid last night. They recovered significant intelligence and captured 2 mid-level commanders. Good work, Captain. She accepted the acknowledgement with a simple nod. It wasn't about credit. It was about the mission. Always the mission. But as she walked to her aircraft for the afternoon sortie, she noticed the change. Ground personnel who'd previously avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully. A lieutenant colonel she'd never met stopped her. Captain, I flew hogs in the first Gulf War. What you did yesterday, that's what we train for but rarely execute. Your husband would be proud. The mention of her husband should have hurt. Instead, it felt like permission. Permission to remember without drowning. Permission to honor him by being excellent at this work they'd both loved. She climbed into her cockpit, ran through pre-flight checks with the same meticulous attention she always brought. The crew chief was a new face today, Technical Sergeant Rodriguez. Ma'am, I heard you mixed it up with Carver last night. Here it comes, she thought, the criticism, the suggestion she'd overreacted. Instead, Rodriguez grinned. My sister's in the Army, infantry. She deals with this crap all the time. Good for you, ma'am. About time someone reminded these guys that small doesn't mean soft. The flight was routine, which in a combat zone meant 3 hours of circling while ground forces moved through terrain that wanted to kill them. No shots fired. No heroics required. She returned to base as the sun painted the mountains orange and gold. Beautiful country when it wasn't trying to kill you, or maybe beautiful because it was trying to kill you. She was too tired to philosophize. Dinner in the mess hall was the same mediocre food it had always been, but tonight she wasn't sitting alone. A group of infantry officers waved her over. She hesitated, old habits of isolation hard to break, then joined them. They talked about the Valley operation, about close calls and small miracles. Someone mentioned Carver's arm. She tensed. Yeah, I heard he tried to hug you and you went full Jason Bourne on him. Laughter around the table. Not cruel. just the dark humor of people who lived with death. I reacted to an unknown contact in reduced visibility. Training took over. She kept her voice neutral. A captain across from her shook his head. Don't sell it short. Carver's a big dude, former college wrestler. You dropped him like he was nothing. That's impressive regardless of context. She didn't know how to respond to praise. She'd spent so long proving herself that acceptance felt foreign. She changed the subject. Tomorrow's mission looks complex. Multiple ground elements across 6 kilometers. Coordination will be critical. They talked tactics until the mess hall began to empty. Walking back to her quarters, she passed the chapel. On impulse, she went inside, empty except for shadows and silence. She sat in a pew near the front, stared at the non-denominational symbols meant to comfort everyone and therefore comfort no one. She wasn't sure what she believed anymore, but her husband had believed. He'd found peace in faith. She thought about him now, not with the raw agony of early grief but with something softer. Bittersweet. I think I'm doing okay, she said to the silence. I think you'd be okay with how I'm handling this. No response. She hadn't expected one, but saying it aloud helped, gave shape to the formless feelings that haunted her quieter moments. She left the chapel feeling not healed but perhaps more whole. Progress was measured in millimeters in a place like this. She'd take what she could get. The next week brought a tempo increase. More missions, more close calls, more moments where her skill kept soldiers alive. Each sortie built her reputation incrementally. The mockery didn't disappear entirely. There would always be someone who needed to diminish others to feel adequate themselves, but it became background noise rather than the primary signal. She could ignore it, focus on what mattered. Then came the mission that would define everything. Intel reported a coalition logistics convoy ambushed and pinned down in a mountain pass. Heavy casualties, multiple vehicles destroyed. The quick reaction force was 30 minutes out. She was 5 minutes out, alone again. Seemed like she was always alone when it mattered most. She pushed the throttles forward, the Warthog's engine straining. The wounded aircraft from her earlier battle had been replaced with a fresh bird. This one was unmarked, pristine. She'd change that today. Widow 1-1, this is Guardian 2-2. We're getting slaughtered up here. They've got the high ground on both sides. RPGs, recoilless rifles, everything. The convoy commander's voice was raw. She could hear explosions in the background, small arms fire, screaming. Guardian, Widow inbound. Give me an assessment. She needed to understand the geometry before committing. Flying into an ambush blind was a good way to become a casualty herself. Widow, they're dug into bunkers on the ridgelines. Can't get an angle with our weapons. We're trapped in the kill zone. I've got 6 KIA, dozen wounded. We need fire support now or we're all dead. The desperation was palpable. She crested a ridge and saw it. The pass was narrow, maybe 40 meters wide. The convoy was strung out, vehicles burning, personnel huddled behind inadequate cover. And above them, carved into the rock face, the firing positions. Perfect overlapping fields of fire. She armed her weapons. This would require precision beyond anything she'd done before. The pass was narrow. The friendly forces were close to the enemy positions. Danger close wasn't adequate terminology. This was suicidal close. One miscalculation and she'd be killing the people she was trying to save. Guardian, mark your positions with smoke. I'm coming in hot. Purple smoke bloomed along the convoy. She adjusted her attack vector. Would approach from the west, sun behind her. Give her a split-second advantage, invisibility. The first pass was reconnaissance. She descended to 1,000 feet, taking fire immediately. Tracers arced up like deadly fireworks. Something hit her wing. She ignored it. Her eyes cataloged the target positions, measured distances, calculated angles, then climbed back up, circled. Guardian, I'm going to make a gun run on the northern ridgeline. Keep everyone's heads down. She didn't give them time to argue. Nosed over. Dove toward earth like a hawk toward prey. The targeting reticle settled on the first bunker. She fired. The cannon roared. 30mm rounds demolished the position, silencing the machine gun that had been raking the convoy. She walked the burst along the ridgeline, methodical and precise. 10 seconds of fire, 20. The gun fell silent, barrel too hot to continue. She pulled up hard, G-forces pressing her into the seat. Climbed, circled. Let the gun cool. Below, the southern ridgeline was still firing. Good hits, good hits. North side is suppressed. Guardian 2-2 sounded shocked that she'd actually pulled it off. She wasn't shocked. She'd done the math. Physics didn't lie. People did. Math didn't. She lined up for another pass, this time targeting the southern positions. Dove again, fired again. More bunkers disappeared in clouds of dust and debris. But one position remained active. A recoilless rifle crew. She saw them reloading, saw them tracking her. They fired. The round missed her cockpit by meters. She felt the shockwave. If they'd let her trajectory slightly more, she'd be dead. No time to process fear. She adjusted her dive angle, fired a Maverick missile at the recoilless rifle position. The missile guided true, impacted dead center. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but a crater. Guardian, you're clear to move. Get your wounded to the evac point. I'll cover your withdrawal. She established an orbit over the pass, a visible promise that nothing would touch them while she had ammunition. The convoy limped out of the pass, vehicles grinding along on damaged suspension, wounded strapped to hoods, walking wounded helping carry those worse off. She watched them until they reached safe ground. Her fuel was critical again. Seemed like every mission ended with her gambling on fumes. She turned toward base, watched the fuel gauge tick down with each minute. The math said she'd make it. Barely. She landed with less than 5 minutes of fuel remaining. Trent met her on the flight line. Volkov, that was the single most impressive display of close air support I've seen in 26 years. Guardian 2-2 is recommending you for a distinguished flying cross. I'm endorsing it. She removed her helmet, felt the sweat cooling on her face. Sir, I was just doing my job. He shook his head. No, you did everyone's job. Most pilots wouldn't have taken those shots. Too risky. You made them anyway, and everyone came home because of it. That evening she found Sergeant Carver waiting outside her quarters. His arm was in a cast, sling holding it immobile. Ma'am, I heard about today, about the pass. He seemed to struggle for words. I've been in combat zones for 15 years. I've seen a lot of pilots, good ones, great ones. You're beyond that. You're something else. She didn't know how to respond. He continued. My arm, it's healing fine, but I wanted to tell you something. When you broke it that moment, I wasn't scared. I was impressed. Does that make sense? Not really, Sergeant. She allowed herself a small smile. He laughed. Yeah, I guess not. What I mean is, in that split second, I saw what the enemy sees when you're bearing down on them. Pure focus competence. No hesitation, no doubt, just action. That's terrifying. That's beautiful. That's what winning looks like. He straightened despite the injured arm. Ma'am, it's been an honor serving in the same AO as you. That's all I wanted to say. He saluted with his good arm. She returned it. Word of the pass engagement spread beyond the base. A journalist embedded with the coalition forces requested an interview. Nadia declined. She wasn't interested in publicity, wasn't trying to make a statement. She was trying to keep people alive. But the journalist wrote the story anyway, using second-hand accounts from the soldiers she'd saved. The article appeared in Stars and Stripes, then got picked up by civilian outlets. Female pilot saves convoy in daring attack. The headline was simultaneously validating and irritating. Why did her gender matter? Would a male pilot have been described as male pilot? But she couldn't control the narrative. She could only control her actions. The missions continued, each one adding to her legend whether she wanted a legend or not. Other female service members started reaching out. A corporal with the MPs, a Navy corpsman attached to a Marine unit, a logistics officer. They didn't ask for anything specific, just wanted to talk to someone who understood the unique pressure of being female in a combat zone. The constant awareness that mistakes would be magnified, successes diminished. She made time for them, paid forward the mentorship she'd never received. 3 months into her deployment, the weather turned. Winter came to Afghanistan with brutal intensity. Snow blanketed the mountains. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Flying became more complex. Ice accumulation on wings, reduced visibility, shorter days, but the enemy didn't care about weather. They adapted, attacked supply lines, hit isolated outposts. The tempo increased even as conditions worsened. Nadia flew through conditions that would have grounded civilian aviation. The A-10 was built for this, so was she. One mission stood out among the blur of sorties. A small outpost, barely 20 soldiers, reported enemy forces massing for an assault. Intelligence suggested up to 200 insurgents, equipped with heavy weapons and mortars. The ground commander requested immediate support. Nadia launched into a snowstorm, visibility measured in meters rather than kilometers, flying on instruments, trusting her screens more than her eyes. The base disappeared behind her, swallowed by white. She climbed through the clouds, broke into clear air above. The sun was setting, painting the cloud tops gold and pink. Navigation to the outpost required precision. GPS was good but not perfect in the mountains. She cross-referenced with known terrain features, confirmed her position with radio bearings. When she descended through the clouds again, she was exactly where she needed to be. The outpost appeared below, a tiny cluster of buildings surrounded by HESCO barriers and concertina wire, fortified but vulnerable, and around it in the gathering darkness, movement. Lots of movement. Stone 1-5, Widow 1-1, I'm on station, deploying flares for illumination. She fired magnesium flares that drifted down on parachutes, casting harsh white light across the landscape. The enemy forces were visible now, moving in organized groups, clearly preparing for a coordinated assault. More fighters than intelligence had suggested. Maybe 300. The outpost didn't stand a chance without her. Widow, Redstone, we see them now. Jesus, there's so many. Can you stop that? The ground commander sounded young, scared. Redstone, stay in your fighting positions. I'm about to make it very loud. She selected her weapons, began her attack. The cannon fired in long, sustained bursts, each one illuminating her aircraft like lightning. She worked systematically, targeting the groups as they formed, disrupting their assault before it could begin. The snow on the ground kicked up in enormous clouds. Bodies fell. Others scattered. She fired more flares when the first batch burned out, turned night into day, turned preparation into chaos. The enemy tried to engage her with anti-aircraft fire. Tracers reached up, some coming close. One round hit her fuselage. She felt the impact through the airframe, kept firing. Her ammunition counter decreased rapidly. She'd brought a full load, 1,100 rounds. She was down to 300, still targets below, still threats. She fired her remaining Mavericks at vehicles she spotted trying to maneuver heavy weapons into position. Each missile found its mark. Explosions bloomed orange against white snow. When her ammunition ran dry, the enemy assault had collapsed. Bodies littered the approaches to the outpost. Survivors were fleeing. She called for an F-16 flight to take over station, provide security through the night, then turned for home, flying through darkness and snow with battle-damaged aircraft and empty weapons. The landing was difficult, crosswinds gusting to 30 knots, snow reducing visibility to minimums. She touched down harder than she would have liked, tires smoking, but the aircraft held together. The next morning, an assessment team visited the outpost. They counted 247 enemy KIA in the immediate vicinity. The assault had been meant to overrun the position completely. Instead, it had been annihilated by a single aircraft. The commander at the outpost, a lieutenant fresh from West Point, sent Nadia a personal message. You saved 20 lives last night. We were writing our final letters when you arrived. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. These moments accumulated, each save, each mission. They built something bigger than individual acts. They built proof. Proof that competence had no gender. Proof that determination could overcome skepticism. Proof that the mockery had always been about the mocker's insecurity, not her ability. She didn't gloat, didn't say, I told you so. She just kept flying, kept doing the job, let the results speak. The war extracted its price. 2 weeks after the outpost defense, she responded to a troops in contact call in a valley she'd never worked before. The situation was confused. Multiple friendly units, multiple enemy groups, everything mixed together in the kind of chaos that made close air support nearly impossible. She arrived on station, tried to sort out the geometry. Radio calls were overlapping, contradictory. Someone was screaming for fire. Someone else was screaming to hold fire. She held high, tried to make sense of the battlefield, then saw it. A group of fighters, clearly armed, moving toward a coalition position. She confirmed with the ground commander. Redstone 6, do you have friendlies at grid November Victor 8241? A pause. Negative Widow, that's all enemy, you're cleared hot. She made her attack run, fired the cannon, watched the group collapse under the 30mm rounds, climbed away, professional, clean, textbook. Except 30 minutes later, the truth emerged. The fighters she'd hit weren't enemy. They were allied militia moving to reinforce the coalition position. Someone had given her the wrong grid, or she'd read it wrong, or the ground commander had been confused. The investigation later would determine the exact breakdown, but the result was the same. She'd killed 6 allied fighters, friendly fire, blue on blue. The nightmare scenario that every close air support pilot dreaded. She didn't remember the flight back to base, didn't remember the debriefing, only remembered sitting in her quarters staring at the wall trying to process what she'd done. The rules of engagement had been followed. She'd confirmed the target, been cleared to engage, everything by the book, but 6 men were dead by her hand. Allied forces, people fighting for the same cause. The weight of it was crushing. Trent found her there hours later, sat down beside her, didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Volkov, this wasn't your fault. The investigation will confirm that. The grid coordinates were transposed. Human error in the chaos. You followed procedure. She shook her head. Doesn't matter whose fault it is, sir. They're still dead. I still killed them. He sighed. Yes, you did, and that's going to stay with you, but you can't let it paralyze you, because tomorrow more soldiers will need you, and the day after. And the day after that. She didn't sleep that night, kept seeing the figures collapsing, kept running through the moments before she fired, looking for the sign she'd missed, the indication she'd ignored, found nothing. Everything had seemed legitimate. That made it worse somehow. If there had been an obvious mistake, she could have learned from it, but this was just chance, bad luck. The fog of war made manifest. People talked about the fog of war like it was a metaphor. It wasn't. It was real. It killed people. The next morning, she filed her flight plan for another mission. Trent tried to ground her, give her time. She refused. Sir, you said it yourself. Soldiers need support today. I can provide that support. If I stay on the ground, I'm letting what happened control me. I won't do that. He studied her face, saw something there that satisfied him. Okay, but you're flying with a wingman today. Hammer 2-2 will accompany you. 2 sets of eyes on every target. She nodded. That was reasonable. Smart even. Flying with Elena Ruiz changed the dynamic. Having another pilot to cross-check, to verify, to share the burden of decisions. They worked together seamlessly, 2 aircraft moving in coordination, covering each other's blind spots. The mission went smoothly. No incidents, professional execution. But Nadia felt the weight of doubt now. The certainty she'd always carried had a crack in it. She double-checked everything, triple-checked, asked for confirmation on confirmations. Elena noticed but didn't comment, just provided the backup without judgment. That doubt saved lives 3 days later. They were supporting a night raid on a suspected weapons cache. Thermal imaging showed figures moving inside a compound. The ground commander cleared them to strike. Nadia set up her attack run, finger on the trigger, then hesitated. Something felt wrong. The movement patterns. She requested another pass for visual confirmation. Elena agreed. They descended lower, risked more exposure to ground fire, and saw it. The figures were children. The compound wasn't a weapons cache. It was a family sheltering from the fighting. Abort, abort, we have civilians. She pulled up hard. Below, the children scattered at the sound of her engines. She'd come within seconds of killing them. The ground commander was confused. Intelligence had been sure, but intelligence was wrong or outdated or deliberately misleading. In war, truth was the first casualty, and it stayed dead. Redstone 6 recommend you verify your intelligence before sending in ground forces. That compound is not hostile. There was acknowledgement, embarrassment. Gratitude. She'd caught it. Elena's voice came over the private channel they shared. That doubt in your head right now, the thing that made you check twice, keep that. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. Nadia didn't respond, didn't trust her voice, but she understood. The friendly fire incident had broken something in her certainty, but maybe certainty was the problem. Maybe the best pilots weren't the ones who never doubted. Maybe they were the ones who doubted and acted anyway, carefully, precisely, with humility about the limits of their knowledge. The deployment wore on. 6 months became 8, 8 became 10. Rumors of redeployment kept getting pushed back. More missions, more saves, more moments where her skill kept catastrophe at bay, but also more exhaustion, more accumulated stress. More nights where sleep wouldn't come. She lost weight, stopped bothering with makeup or hairstyling. Function mattered. Appearance didn't. She noticed the hollows under her eyes in mirrors but couldn't bring herself to care. Other pilots rotated in. Some stayed. Some went home. She remained constant. The deployment became her identity. She forgot what normal life felt like. Forgot what it was like to make decisions that didn't involve life and death. To worry about mundane things like bills or traffic or what to eat for dinner. Everything narrowed to the mission. To keeping people alive. To the dance with death she performed every time she strapped into the cockpit. Then came the mission that would end everything. She launched on what was supposed to be a routine patrol, armed reconnaissance along a suspected infiltration route. Standard procedure, nothing unusual, except 30 minutes into the flight her wingman Alina reported smoke from her aircraft. Engine trouble, serious enough that Alina had to break off, return to base. Widow Hammer, I'm going to need to RTB. Can you handle the route solo? Nadia confirmed. She'd flown solo before, many times. This was nothing new. But 20 minutes after Alina departed, the radio exploded with an urgent call. Any aircraft, this is Mustang 66. We are under heavy attack, multiple casualties, need immediate air support. She recognized the call sign. A special forces team deep in the mountains on a sensitive operation. There was no one else in position. She checked her fuel, just enough to make one engagement then head home. She turned toward their position. Mustang 66, Widow 11 responding. Send location. The coordinates put them in a valley notorious for enemy activity. The Special Forces team had been compromised during a raid. Now they were fighting for their lives against overwhelming numbers. She pushed her aircraft to maximum speed. The mountains blurred past. She descended through clouds, broke into the valley. Below she could see the battle. The SF team was pinned in a compound, enemy forces swarming from all sides. This wasn't a random engagement. This was planned. The enemy had known they were coming. She made her first gun run, scattering the attackers, giving the SF team breathing room. But as she pulled up, her radar warning receiver lit up. Missile launch. Someone had a shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missile. She deployed flares, chaff, executed evasive maneuvers. The missile missed. Barely. She circled, came in from a different angle, fired again. More enemies fell, but the missile threat remained. She couldn't keep dodging forever. Eventually, luck would run out. Widow, Mustang 66, we're attempting to exfil to an evacuation point. Can you cover us? She confirmed. Of course she could. That's what she did. That's all she did anymore. She made repeated passes, laying down suppressive fire, keeping the enemy at a distance while the SF team moved. Miles to cover on foot, through hostile territory. She'd be their guardian until her ammunition ran out or she got shot down, whichever came first. The second missile caught her as she was pulling out of a dive. She saw the launch, deployed countermeasures, but this one was better, newer technology. It tracked through her flares, impacted her left engine. The explosion was deafening even through her helmet. Red lights illuminated the cockpit. Fire warning, engine failure, hydraulic failure. The A-10 shuddered but stayed airborne. One engine could keep her flying. Barely. But the battle damage was severe. She could feel the aircraft responding sluggishly. Something essential had been hit. Widow 11 declaring emergency. I'm hit. Single-engine operation, heading for base. She fought the controls, nursed the wounded aircraft toward safety. But the SF team was still moving, still exposed. She could leave. No one would blame her. Her aircraft was damaged. She'd done enough, more than enough, or she could stay, keep them covered, probably die in the attempt. The choice was binary, simple, impossible. Her husband's voice echoed in memory, something he'd said once over dinner, talking about a training scenario. The hard right versus the easy wrong, that's where character shows. She'd asked him what he meant. He'd smiled. Sometimes the right choice is obvious and hard, and you do it anyway or you don't, and that tells you who you are. She banked hard, turned back toward the valley, ignored the alarms, ignored the rational voice screaming at her to save herself. Mustang 66, Widow, I'm staying on station. Get your people to safety. The SF commander's voice cracked. Widow, you're hit. You need to save yourself. She didn't respond, just made another pass, firing with her remaining ammunition. The gun fell silent, Winchester out of everything except determination, but she stayed, circled overhead, a visible reminder to the enemy that someone was watching, that attacks would not go unanswered. Even with no weapons, her presence mattered. Psychological warfare. Sometimes the threat of attack was enough. Her remaining engine began to show signs of stress. Temperature climbing, oil pressure dropping. The aircraft was dying beneath her. She ran calculations. She might make it back to base, or she might crash somewhere in these mountains, hope for rescue, hope the enemy didn't find her first. A third option presented itself. She could stay over the SF team until her engine quit, then eject, land close to them, add her rifle to their defense. One more shooter, better than nothing. The decision made itself. She maintained her orbit even as systems began failing one by one. The SF team was close to the evacuation point now. A helicopter was inbound, just a few more minutes, that's all they needed. She could give them that. Her engine temperature redlined. She ignored it. The altimeter showed decreasing altitude. The aircraft was slowly losing the battle with gravity. She adjusted constantly, fighting to maintain position over her charges. The helicopter appeared. Beautiful. Salvation. Mustang, your ride's here, get on board. The helicopter landed in a hail of covering fire from both the SF team and the crew chiefs on board. The team loaded up rapidly, wounded first, then everyone else. The helicopter lifted off, banked away. They were safe. Mission complete. Now she just had to land this dying aircraft. She turned toward base. The engine quit 10 seconds later. Warning tone screamed. The aircraft was now a glider, a heavy, damaged, aerodynamically terrible glider. She wouldn't make the base. Wouldn't even make the airspace. She'd have to eject or find somewhere to put down. Below, the terrain was nothing but mountains and rocks and death. Nowhere to land, except there, a small valley with a relatively flat section. Maybe 200 meters, not enough for a normal landing, but maybe enough for a controlled crash. She aimed for it, committed completely. This would work or it wouldn't. No middle ground. The ground rushed up. She held the aircraft steady. Nose up, bleeding speed, let it settle. The wheels touched, held, then collapsed. The aircraft slid on its belly, throwing sparks, grinding through rock and dirt. Time distorted. The crash seemed to last forever and no time at all. Metal screamed. Something exploded behind her. Then silence. She was alive somehow. The aircraft had stopped. She ran through shutdown procedures on autopilot even though there was nothing left to shut down. Unstrapped, popped the canopy, climbed out. Stood on unsteady legs beside the wreckage of her Warthog. Smoke rising, fuel leaking. She grabbed her survival kit, her rifle, and moved away quickly before something exploded. She activated her emergency beacon, transmitted her position, then found cover and waited. Rescue would come. Eventually, she just had to survive until then. The sun was setting, temperature dropping. She crashed somewhere in hostile territory with nothing but basic survival gear and the absolute certainty that she'd do it all again, given the choice, given the chance. Because that's what she'd sworn to do, protect those who couldn't protect themselves, no matter the cost. Rescue came 4 hours later. A special forces team, the same one she'd saved, inserted by helicopter to retrieve her. They found her in good condition, alert, weapon ready. The team leader approached with something like reverence. "Ma'am, we couldn't leave you behind, not after what you did." She nodded, too tired for words. They extracted to a secure location, then flew her back to Bagram. The entire base turned out to meet her. She didn't remember much of that night, just faces, gratitude, respect, the things she'd never asked for but somehow earned anyway. The investigation into her crash was exhaustive. They wanted to understand how she'd survived, how she'd flown a critically damaged aircraft for so long, what decisions she'd made and why. She answered honestly, explained the geometry, the calculations, the choices. They seemed dissatisfied with how mundane it all sounded. They wanted heroism. She gave them mathematics. In the end, they awarded her the Distinguished Flying Cross, her second of the deployment, along with a Purple Heart for the wounds she'd received during the crash. Injuries she hadn't even noticed until the adrenaline wore off. Her deployment ended 3 weeks later. She packed her gear, said goodbye to people who'd become something more than colleagues, not quite family, something without a word. Combat bonds, forged in shared danger, tempered in mutual respect. The flight home was long, multiple transports, multiple delays. Finally, she landed stateside, stepped onto American soil for the first time in almost a year. Everything looked strange, too clean, too safe, too disconnected from the reality she'd been living. The transition back was harder than the deployment. She'd expected that, known it intellectually, but experiencing it was different. Civilian life moved at a different pace. People worried about different things, traffic jams and restaurant waits and the meaningless dramas of peacetime existence. She struggled to care, struggled to connect. The Air Force mandated counseling. She attended dutifully, talked about appropriate topics, kept the really difficult thoughts to herself. How do you explain to someone who's never been there that you miss it, that for all the horror there was also purpose, clarity, meaning? She was assigned to a training squadron, teaching new pilots close air support tactics, passing on lessons learned in blood. The students were eager, hungry for knowledge. She taught them well, every technique, every trick, every consideration that might keep them alive. But she also taught them humility, taught them about the fog of war, about the mistakes that come despite best intentions, about the weight of responsibility that comes with ordnance release authority. Some understood. Others would have to learn the hard way. Years passed. She made captain, then major, then lieutenant colonel. Her legend grew in the telling and retelling, stories embellished until she barely recognized herself in them. The fearless pilot who'd single-handedly saved hundreds, the woman who'd broken a sergeant's arm with surgical precision, the warrior who'd crashed her aircraft and walked away without a scratch. Most of it was exaggeration. Some of it was outright fabrication. She didn't correct it, let people believe what they needed to believe. She never remarried, had opportunities. Several pilots expressed interest. Good men, she couldn't do it. Something in her had been locked during that deployment, the part that connected romantically, that allowed vulnerability. She had friends, had colleagues she respected, but the deeper intimacy remained out of reach. Her husband's memory wasn't the barrier. She'd made peace with losing him. It was more that she'd seen what she was capable of, the coldness required to make life-and-death decisions in seconds. She wasn't sure she wanted to bring that into someone's life. Retired after 22 years, full colonel, decorated beyond what most officers achieved. The ceremony was dignified, speeches about service and sacrifice. She accepted them gracefully, but her mind was elsewhere, thinking about a valley in Afghanistan, about soldiers she'd saved and ones she'd killed, about choices made in split seconds that echoed through decades. The flag they presented her was folded with precision. She held it carefully. This cloth represented something she couldn't articulate. Everything and nothing, a career, a calling, a life spent in service to something larger. Civilian life took adjustment, again. She worked as a defense contractor for a while, consulting on close air support tactics. The money was good, the work was meaningless. She quit after 2 years, started teaching at a university instead, aerospace engineering. The students were bright, curious. None of them understood what it meant to fly in combat, but she taught them the principles anyway. Physics didn't care about context. Lift and drag and thrust worked the same in peace and war. One day, a young woman approached after class. "Professor Volkov, I'm joining the Air Force after graduation. I want to fly. Everyone says I can't, that it's too hard for women, that we're not suited for it." Nadia studied her, saw the determination, the doubt underneath, recognized herself 20 years ago. "Everyone's wrong. You can fly, you can excel, but understand this. You'll have to prove yourself constantly. Your successes will be minimized. Your mistakes will be magnified. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's reality." The student's face fell. Nadia continued. "But here's what they won't tell you. That pressure creates diamonds. You'll become better than you ever imagined because you'll have to be. And one day you'll look back and realize all the people who doubted you weren't obstacles. They were motivation. They forged you into something exceptional." The student nodded slowly. Did you face that, the doubt?" Nadia smiled. "Every single day. Still do sometimes, but I flew anyway, and so will you." Years later, she attended an air show, watched A-10s perform demonstrations for crowds who'd never seen one in combat. The aircraft looked graceful now, elegant even. She remembered them differently, remembered the smell of gun smoke, the vibration of the cannon firing, the desperate beauty of battle. An older man approached her. Sergeant First Class Carver, retired. His arm had healed perfectly. "Ma'am, I hoped I'd see you here." They talked about deployments and transitions and the strange half-life that veterans inhabited. Neither truly civilian nor still military. Something in between. "My daughter enlisted," he said. "Army, she's infantry. One of the first women allowed in combat arms. She asks about you sometimes, about what it was like for you." Nadia considered her words carefully. "Tell her it's hard, tell her it's worth it. Tell her competence is the only argument that matters, everything else is noise." He nodded. "I'll tell her, she'll listen. You're kind of a legend to her generation, the pilot who refused to quit, who proved everyone wrong." Nadia laughed. "I didn't prove anyone wrong, I just flew airplanes. They assigned meaning to it." But that wasn't quite true. She'd known what she was doing, known that every mission was a statement, that her presence in that cockpit challenged assumptions, broke barriers, created space for those who'd come after. She'd carried that weight consciously, never spoke about it but felt it always. The responsibility of being first, of being example, of knowing that her failures would be used to justify excluding others. It had been exhausting, exhilarating, essential. As the sun set over the airfield, she watched the last A-10 land. The aircraft taxied to parking, engines winding down, beautiful machines, ugly and perfect and deadly. She'd given them years of her life. They'd given her purpose, fair trade. She walked to her car, drove home through suburban streets that still felt foreign after all these years. Her house was small, neat, filled with mementos from a life lived in the air, photos of aircraft, plaques and medals she never displayed but couldn't discard. She made tea, sat on her porch. The sky above was clear, stars just beginning to emerge. Somewhere a pilot was flying tonight, maybe facing fire, maybe saving lives, maybe both. She whispered a small prayer for them, not to any particular god, just to the sky itself, to luck and skill and the thin margin between success and catastrophe. The prayer of someone who'd walked that margin and survived. She finished her tea, went inside. Tomorrow she'd teach again, pass on knowledge, shape the next generation. Tonight she'd remember. Because that's what veterans did. They carried the past forward, not as burden but as trust, as responsibility to those who didn't make it back, to those who'd bled, to those who'd stood beside them in the dark places and held the line. She'd held the line for a year, for a deployment, for a moment in history when it had mattered desperately, and she'd held it well. That knowledge, quiet and certain, sustained her through the long civilian years. She'd been tested. She'd been adequate. No. She'd been more than adequate. She'd been exactly what was needed, exactly when it mattered. And that would have to be enough.